She is going to be talking about her mother, Mildred Barnes, who's a JP here, and that's all I'm going to say because I'm so excited. Okay? All right, so arrow here as you go through.
Okay.
And then you need to go to the mic.
Okay.
Good, if you're comfortable.
All right. As some of you know, my last name used to be Barnes. Beverly Barnes Mummey is my name. And my mother was Mickey Barnes. She got that name from my father because he had a sister named Mildred, and there was already a Mildred Barnes. So he said, we can't have two Mildred Barnes. You're going to be Mickey. So she lived with that until the end of her life, and she liked it. So she was Mickey Barnes.
Hey, Ben.
Mm-hmm.
Talk. You always have to kiss it.
Oh, okay, get closer, huh? Like that.
Ah, is that better?
Yeah. Okay.
Much better.
Much better? Okay. So this is, since it's Valentine's Day, and they said they wanted to talk about the wedding capital of Texas because of love stories, and it's Valentine's Day. Those are my parents, and I wanted to talk about their love story a little bit. My dad was from Rockwall, generations back, and my mother was not. So this is how she got to Rockwall, to be the wedding judge that she was. She and my dad met in World War II in Paris, Texas. And it's real fun because sometimes those questions you get to answer when you forget your password say, in which city did your parents meet? And I get to put Paris. So there was some kind of a camp in Paris during World War II, and my mother was working in a cafe in Paris. She's from Blossom, Texas, which is a little tiny town near Paris. And she was working in a cafe, and they met in a cafe there in Paris, Texas. And it just so happened that her two sisters met men and ended up being married. One was from the Air Force, one was from the Navy, and my dad was from the Marines. So he was a Marine, and they ended up getting married, and he went off to World War II and fought in the South Pacific, made it home, and then they were at Camp Lejeune, and that's where my brother was born. And finally, when he got out of the service, they were able to come to Rockwall, his hometown. And I'm happy that they did. I had a wonderful childhood here in Rockwall. It was a great town to grow up in. Any of you that grew up in Rockwall know that. It was pretty idyllic, kind of like Mayberry or Leave It to Beaver type situation. My friends, by the way, I did not introduce. I was going to introduce some people. I have my lifelong friends sitting on the front row. Back in those days, there was no kindergarten, so we went from first grade to high school graduation together. And in our graduation, there were only 48 people, so we're pretty close. And after about 45 years after graduation, we got back together, and we now have lunch once a month, and we can have as many as 12 people show up, and that's pretty good out of a class of 48. So they're on the front row. My husband and my grandson are on the other front row. I have a cousin in the back row, so that's exciting. And I have one of my book club members here too. So let me get back to what we were talking about. So they came to Rockwall, Texas. I don't know how my dad decided to be justice of the peace. He was great friends with Ralph Hall, and Ralph Hall was the county judge. So I don't know, maybe they got together and decided they'd both run for office. But anyway, my dad was justice of the peace when he came back from World War II. He was also a carpenter. So he made money building things, and he built my mother a little house on Goliad. And you may remember the little houses on Goliad that were a Goliad place at one time. And then after I was born, they needed a bigger house, so he built her a house at 112 Glen Avenue, and that's the road right across from the Sonic. And at that time, that was the last street in town. There were a few houses on Ridge Road, but Glen Avenue was it. And Alamo, that was on one at the end of Glen Avenue, was a dirt road, and there was a barn across the street with all kinds of animals. So he built her this house, and that land that he built it on was given to him by his grandparents, my great-grandparents. Their last name was Fondren, and they're also Old Rockwall. And I bought a house that was behind the Baptist church once, got the deed, and it was also part of the Fondren farm. So my family has deep roots in Rockwalls. So the 112 Glen Avenue was the place where all the weddings at night took place. So they were living this Leave It to Beaver wonderful life until it was only about a month after they moved into their new house. My dad was killed in an automobile accident. And that left my mother with 2 kids, a new house, and a car, which was ideally before, but then she was left with, how do I provide for my children and keep this house up? People came to her and said, you are gonna have to move out of this house, you'll probably have to move back with your parents. And she was always a real tough cookie, and she said, no way, I will figure out a way. And she did. And I do not know who decided that she could finish my dad's term as Justice of the Peace, but somehow that got, and maybe it was Ralph Hall, since he was such good friends, and he knew my mother was tough enough to do it, because not only, of course, did she marry people, but she had, that was her office right over there. And I remember being as young as 3, that I have a faint memory of being in that office, and sometimes being in this courtroom. But she went ahead and took over my dad's term, and also I read articles that said she was known as a fair but tough judge. You didn't really want to go see Mrs. Barnes if you didn't have to, kind of thing. So and I remember too that she also had to go and pronounce people dead. So there were a lot of aspects besides the marrying part, but to her the best part was marrying people. She enjoyed that so much. And Rockwall decided to become, I don't know how they did this or who decided they would all get together. Dr. Sparks would issue a license. Dr. Sparks would give the blood test at any time of the night or day. The night watchman here at the courthouse was deputized to be county clerk, and he would issue the license, which was $2.50 at that time. And they would then send them on to 112 Glen Avenue. So she was Justice of the Peace from 1952 to 1966. But the years when Rockwall was a marrying capital was mostly in the 50s. The law had already been changed after a while that said you could only do it during business, could only issue license and things like that during business hours. So she enjoyed doing what she did, and she made money. And I believe that's how she was able to afford her children more than anything, was by, she didn't charge anything, it was left to the people who came to get married, how much they wanted to pay. So, I read in one article, it said she sometimes got as little as 50 cents. So, and other times, I'm sure people gave her more, but I never remember wanting for anything as a child. I never remember hardship. I remember, oh, by the way, my mother, like I said, she was a tough cookie and she did whatever she needed to do to make sure we made it. So she rented out a room in our house. She and I shared a room until I was 10 years old because we rented out a room in the house and she did these weddings. Our living room was where the weddings took place. And as a child, I remember not being allowed to go in there. That was the sanctuary for her weddings. She had beautiful furniture. She kept it very nice. There was a sign in our front yard that was lighted that would tell the people that the Justice of the Peace lives here. So that's how the county clerk would tell them to go to 112 Glen Avenue and tell them how to get there. And then there was a sign in the yard that told them that they were there then and they could come. And some nights, some weekends, she married as many as 15 couples. And over her career, she married over 66,000 couples. And that's a lot to think about. And not all of them were great, I guess, because there were letters from mothers who were not happy at all. That their children had eloped and come. And I'm sure the success of all of this and the number of couples was our proximity to Dallas and Garland and other towns like that. So she did get some letters that said that. And I have a quote on the next page that I got out of an article, and I'll read that when we get there. But my mouth is getting so dry, I meant to drink some water. I also read in an article that in 1965, I can understand how she needed the weddings to boost her income because her salary in 1965 was $1,116 for the year. So I can't even imagine that now, how anybody could make it on that salary. But after the weddings in the 60s started drying up because they could no longer be open at night and we couldn't just marry anybody. She went to beauty school and became a beautician. And when she was Justice of the Peace, she never had an opponent run against her, is what they said. Thank you so much. I am just so dry. She had no opponents the whole time she ran. So, but I do remember, and some of you may remember too, when there would be elections and we'd all come to the square and they'd write it on a chalkboard. And I remember helping Ralph Hall, stuffing things for him to run for office. And it was all pretty exciting. I enjoyed being here, doing those things with my mother. So, my one grandson didn't end up coming, but I was going to introduce him because he's 15 now, and he plays for the Rockwall Yellow Jackets. And I was going to say that not only did his grandfather play for the Yellow Jackets, he had a couple of uncles that played for the Yellow Jackets, also a great uncle, and let's see, 2 great grandfathers, and a great great grandfather. So there's a long legacy of the football in our family too. So mention the salary and the letters. But one good thing that she did get to do before she passed away was she got to attend a 50th wedding anniversary of a couple she had married. Oh, she loved that. And she loved knowing that she married people that were happy and, you know, that it was a good thing. So that was great for her. Also, when I taught school, I taught at Reinhardt Elementary. I taught with a teacher who had been, her parents had been married by my father. And I had run into people as I go about life who tell me that they were married by either my father or my mother. When I went to the library to do some research, the librarian there told me that her parents were married. So there's 6,000 couples walking around somewhere that could tell me all about it, I guess. But when my mother passed away, at her funeral, we gave people the opportunity to come up if they wanted to speak. And some of our neighbors came up and gave their perspective on the weddings going on across the street and how exciting it was as a child or as a teenager that they got to watch. We had a picture window, and if the curtains were open and the lights were on, they'd sit on the curb and watch the weddings. So it was like the drive-in movie on the street. They loved that. So there were a lot of fun stories about my mother. So let me go to the next one. I talked about the Sparks Clinic, the night watchman. This is the quote that was in the paper from, it said, if the license is in order and the two persons are not drunk, I married them. And there was a lot of talk in the newspaper about all of them getting together and talking about if a person was intoxicated, they couldn't issue the license or they couldn't do the blood test and she shouldn't marry him. So they tried to take all those things in consideration. And that picture has Ralph Hall and some of the other people that were pretty well known here in the county. She's sitting down, and anyway, it was a fun time in Rockwall, and I really enjoyed having. I thought my mother was wonderful. You know, I thought. Because she always dressed up, she always kept herself very presentable because she never knew when there'd be a wedding. So I always thought my mother looked great all the time, you know. Now, she did. Plus, being a beautician, you know, she loved to do hair, so she was always loved to do hair and makeup. Yes, sir?
Do you recall who was the night watchman during this time?
They tell me the name over and over, but I don't remember it.
Jean Eagle by chance?
Pardon me?
Jean Eagle?
I don't know, I've got it over here in one of these. I don't know. I'll tell you what, we'll look through these articles and find out, because I don't remember the name, but they did mention it several times. I was thinking, there used to be some guy around the courthouse that was called Goose. Anybody remember Goose? I thought that's who it was, but I guess it wasn't. The name wasn't in the articles that I saw. It wasn't Goose. And yes.
My grandfather was night watchman here also.
Really? Maybe it was him.
They called him Bo Morrow.
Bo Morrow? I don't know.
And my grandparents.
And then I wanted to open up for questions, so, yes.
I was just curious, like, what time would your mom kind of shut things down, like?
She never did.
It wasn't, she had
They'd
to be
come.
24/7.
Well, she had a real pretty robe that she put on.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, she had real
Very good.
gorgeous clothes, so she'd be
Yes.
ready, you know, but she had a real pretty robe that she put on.
Good for her, she was prepared.
And like I said, she loved makeup and jewelry and hair, and that's how she got into the hair business. But she was pretty glamorous, you know, and pretty tough. Yes,
I actually worked for Dr. Sparks at that time.
did you
I
really?
called your mother and got her out of bed many nights. And we shut our clinic down at 12 o'clock.
Did
So
you?
I worked from high school, from when I got out of school until midnight. And we did blood tests. At that time, you had to have a pelvic examination as well.
Oh, I did not
So
know that.
we did pelvics on all the women and whatever they do to men, I don't know. Anyway, so
Didn't get
I
in that
called your
department.
mama out many times.
But like I said, that's how she was making the money to raise her children, you
And
know?
we had people coming from Oklahoma, they came from everywhere. And you call this a Mecca marriage, we called this I Do Heal.
Oh, that's good.
Sparks Clinic, this was I Do Heal. And that's what Ralph Hall called it. And so we were in on marrying many of those people. And the rule was, when they came in the clinic, if they were drinking, they were sent home.
I read that over and
We
over,
don't
kind
do
of,
drinking
like,
here, so.
if they're intoxicated, we don't do it. Cause I guess there were some people in town were feeling pretty bad about, you know, being known for marrying anybody, and they had objections and things like that.
Alright, I really found the name.
Okay,
Mitch, it was Jean Payne. Jean Payne.
My great aunt married Gene Eagle, and he died probably before this, period.
probably before that period.
There's a funny quote in here, Beverly, that I like from this article.
Okay,
Marrying couples is the greatest thrill of the job, she says, and I've had good luck with them making happy homes so far as I know. And then it goes on to say, since the attractive justice of the peace took over in 1952, when her husband was fatally injured in an auto accident during his tenure in the same office, she has never had an opponent.
right.
Since the attractive JP took over.
Yeah. Yes, another article mentioned that too,
Yep.
said she was something like a track. Oh, and by the way, at that time, one article said there were few women justice of the peace, and one said there were 5 in the whole state of Texas. So it was a novelty. And Rockwall is known for beautiful marriage license, you remember? And they still are, aren't they?
Yes, Jennifer Falls came up, I think last year, she's county clerk, she brought service on the marriage license for a year. And till this day, they still have one of the fanciest marriage licenses. A lot of people come to Rockwall just to get married.
I did. When my husband proposed, I said, we're getting married in Rockwall County. For that license.
Yes,
We did.
Yeah.
In fact, we were married by Maddie Mays.
Oh, yeah?
Last one.
Maddie was after my mother, I don't know how far after,
We got the
way
last
after,
one in.
yeah, back in the 70s, wasn't it? Or was it?
Maggie Mays became JP in 1970, 5, I believe, or 76. Right
Okay.
through there. Maybe she was elected in 75 and took office in 76. Wouldn't that be right, Darla?
Yeah, but she did it through the 80s.
Yeah,
she was
Miss
in-
Maddie, I know. Yes.
I worked for her at night, putting logging stuff in her.
Yes,
I
sir.
don't know what year they quit giving them out, but, you used to get your little goodie bag too. And I don't know that anybody else ever did that here in Rockwall.
I don't
And
know.
your little goodie bag had all kinds of stuff, and trust me.
What was in it? What was in your goodie bag?
Yes, it did, it did. I don't know.
I didn't get one.
I never saw that, so I don't know.
Cool.
We didn't have goodie bags at our house. I don't know.
I got mine in
Oh, the county clerk.
81, so I don't know when they quit.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, it was known as
or your mom was in. Because my parents eloped here in 1935.
Oh, really?
And my grandfather married his second wife here in 1934.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, I was told a story, I don't remember by who, but people would come to Rockwall to get married, drive to see the rock wall, pay their quarter to go down into the tunnel
Mhm.
and see the rock wall, and then they drive to the state fair where they got their one and only picture taken for their wedding. That's what I was told.
Could be.
Well, it was called Marion Capital on the hill.
On the hill.
You come off 66.
Right.
I've heard that story several times.
Did y'all all get married in Rockwall? Did y'all all get married in
Who in here was married in Rockwall?
Oh, my goodness. So you have the beautiful marriage license. I don't know, my husband just raised his hand. We got our marriage license in Austin, Texas. We didn't get our marriage license yet. Got married in my mother's backyard, my brother Jones. Anyone else have any questions?
I remember one night, you and I were witnessing, we were not in front where the people could see us, but we were looking while your
Yeah.
mother married someone.
And my friends got to see some weddings too, when they come over to spend the night, so. It was pretty exciting. It was an exciting.
I remember it too.
Yeah.
They did have very pretty marriage license. I worked in the county clerk's office and I issued marriage license.
So Beverly, when you came that first time, I wasn't there, but you were talking to Marcy. You
Yes,
said that parents, mothers, would show up on your front door
occasionally,
occasionally.
and say,
How,
why did
how
you do that?
often? How
No,
often?
I don't it's more like I read it in a,
Oh,
I don't really remember it, but I did read in some of the things that happened in letters. She would get letters that say, why did you marry my daughter? She's
well, because the legal age was
18, it says.
it always 18?
I think people
If you get married at 16, you make your dad's commission.
Ah,
Okay.
yes,
I know it was something you know.
Was there any times that you like went into the, to like that one room that you're talking about when there was a marriage?
no, she would not let me go in that room when there were so many. No, she was very, that was her job, and, you know, we were the kids were seen and not heard kind of thing.
I know Jennifer Paul just talked about having one time a year to promote, because we were known as the marriage capital of Texas. She's talked about trying to set a date where they'll do weddings 24 hours. That's the way you used to do it, you know, but I don't think it ever happened.
But I guess it stopped at midnight. I didn't know that because I thought they kind of made it sound like in the articles that it happened.
I heard stories at all times of the night.
That's what I used to hear too, but
So-
maybe if they already had their license or something, they would come at a weird time. I don't know.
What year did the state come and say you can only do it 9 to 5?
I believe it was the late 50s.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I think most of those 6,000 took place between 52 and 57. That's what I read. That's when it was really hot. Yes.
Ernest Emmons told me that when he was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
that he would hang around the courthouse on the weekends, and the night watchman would give him a nickel to show the couple
Where to
where
go?
the house was.
Yeah. I'm sure there were a lot of people just walking up the steps wondering, where do I go now, you know? But we had a lighted sign in our yard, so they knew they were there. Yes.
I have a famous quote from your mother. We moved down here in '82, and we moved in with her
My husband's from Michigan.
Who didn't like me in the first place. And, we was sitting at the table, her famous quote was, well, if you don't like it, take I-30 East. Said that more than once.
There's a letter that she quoted in this article.
Okay.
So the 72-hour waiting period didn't become law until 1987, 4 years after the blood test was dropped. In the 1950s, Texas men under 21 and girls under 18 supposedly needed parental approval to get the marriage license. Now most people under 18 need consent. I have had mothers write me awful letters after I had married their daughters, Ms. Barnes recalled in the news story. But if the license is in order and the two persons are not drunk, I marry them. Perhaps one of those awful letters was the one penned by Mrs. J.P. Thomas of Dallas. In correspondence delivered without a street address to the Lady Justice of the Peace, Rockwall, Texas, she took issue with Miss Barnes' marriage of her 16-year-old daughter, Judy Thomas, to C.H. Parsons on March 14th, 1953. For example, she wrote, I do hope that God puts forgiveness in my heart for the way I feel toward you. You also know that that most people are civilized citizens and expect their children to have decent weddings when they are of marriageable age. The damage is done to my child, but please think carefully before you cause the same kind of misery to someone else. My goodness.
But if they weren't drunk, and the marriage license was in order, she married me.
That's a mom that wanted to give her daughter a good wedding.
Yeah.
Did y'all have any big weddings? I mean, did anybody come with like an entourage?
Not that I remember. I think it was mostly an elope kind of thing. Yes,
I made a list of what did she charge?
she did not charge. It was whatever they gave her. And she also said in one of those articles, she got a few hot checks. But like I said, I don't remember feeling like we needed anything. We didn't have what we needed. You know, we were. And that time in Rockwall, it seemed like everybody was pretty much the same. We all had the same kind of things, and nobody was rich and nobody was super poor. We were all just. It was just a fun time that we really enjoyed.
You were talking about sometimes she just got 50 cents. At that time, a dime would buy you a Coke and a candy bar. So that was really more than it sounds like.
More than it sounds like today, yes. Yes, I remember going to the movies and getting a quarter and a dime. The quarter was to get in and the dime was for whatever we wanted for, like you said, a drink and a candy bar. So times have changed, for sure.